As we meet here in New York at the UN General Assembly for this Summit of the Future, we're at a global inflection point. Faced with escalating instability undermining the very foundations of the international order, beset by the increasingly dire costs of climate change, contending with rising inequality that is leaving the most vulnerable behind, plagued by the erosion of women's rights, LGBT+ rights, and Indigenous rights, and grappling with dire humanitarian crises perpetuating record levels of displacement, we have a choice.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed the United Nations at their annual Summit for the Future on Sunday in New York, where he acknowledged that young Canadians are losing hope that they will have the same quality of life as the generations that came before. It's long and filled with many buzzwords, but here are Trudeau's remarks in full.
As I travel across my country, Canadians of all walks of life, but particularly young Canadians, tell me that they're worried. They're worried about the state of the world and the future. But most importantly, they're worried about the very promise of Canada. The promise that if you work hard, you can do better than the generations that preceded you. That promise is slipping out of reach, so as a government, we are stepping up. The solution to anxiety and angst is not to deceive and deflect, but to take action. We know that confident, successful countries invest in their citizens, in their workers, in their middle class.
It should come as no surprise that Trudeau is prioritizing collectivism while ignoring the escalating crisis faced by Canadians, like rampant violence on our streets, a spiraling opioid epidemic, a housing crisis, and a growing distrust in his government's competence. Trudeau shamelessly commits $5 billion of taxpayer money to global climate financing efforts. It's interesting to note here that the decision to uphold the Pact for the Future took place in a decision procedure that took less than 2 seconds. Look at this. The president of the 79th United Nations General Assembly, Philemon Yang, ruled by decree that member states adopt the Pact for the Future and all of its annexes.
The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/79/L2 entitled the Pact for the Future. May I take it that the Assembly decides to adopt draft resolution A/79/L2. It is so decided.
Climate change and inflation don't stop at borders. Inequality is a problem for the entire world, for people from all walks of life. If we really want to serve our own citizens, we must together tackle the great global challenges. We should work within institutions such as the United Nations and renew our commitment to the Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030. We need to protect and support the rule of law and democratic values. We should spearhead efforts to reform in the international financial institutions. We must put women's and girls' rights at the very heart of our efforts, much like we have done with our feminist international assistance policy. We must recognise also that rich countries such as Canada have a duty to fight climate change, which is what we're doing through our commitment of $5 billion towards global climate financing efforts. And we are the first big oil and gas producing country to establish an emission ceiling in this sector.
It's noted on the program website detailing the summit itinerary that the adoption of the outcome document entitled A Pact for the Future was agreed in advance by consensus through intergovernmental negotiations to which the Global Digital Compact and Declaration on Future Generations would be annexed if intergovernmentally agreed. The pact aims to create a shared framework that mandates global cooperation on things like climate change initiatives, inequality, and technological advancements. It further adheres member states to collective action on Agenda 2030 and implementing global governance. It demands member states' action on sustainable development, or the SDGs, and financing of such. It adheres member states to international peace and security commitments, science and technology innovation, and digital cooperation through resource sharing, and more specifically, global emergencies. Under this section, it will allow the UN to strengthen efforts to prevent, anticipate, and mitigate the impact of humanitarian emergencies on people in need, while paying special attention to the needs of persons in the most vulnerable situations. It further mandates member states uphold the UN's commitment to youth and future generations by giving them a voice at the national level. And lastly, the pact will transform global governance, where it is stated, "We will take action to strengthen and reinvigorate multilateralism and deepen international cooperation. We reaffirm unwavering commitment to international law, including the Charter, to address global challenges, some of which could overwhelm and threaten all of humanity. A transformation in global governance is essential to ensure that the positive progress we have seen across all three pillars of the work of the United Nations in recent decades does not unravel. We will not allow this to happen." Annexes include that Global Digital Compact to expand the digital economy and secure an inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital space, which to me sounds a lot like censorship if the last few years were any indication on the way these global entities can influence and affect information sharing online. This pact essentially grants the United Nations Secretary General unprecedented powers to declare emergencies under the guise of global crises, raising alarms about repeated and future overreach of the establishment of a world government. Mainstream media remains largely uncritical and or silent on this significant development, while the heavy lifting is left to independent journalists to highlight the vague legislation that could threaten individual rights, again under the guise of fighting global challenges like the up for debate climate crisis, financial instability, and ever-looming threats of the next pandemic, coined Disease X by the Globalist Health Organization. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini.
Delegates, nearly 80 years ago, in the aftermath of the most destructive war in our collective history, we formed these United Nations. And we did so with the aspiration to build something better for today's generations, yes, but also for many generations to come. All of us gathered here have an opportunity to hold true to that mission, to fulfill the promise of our pact for the future, to deliver fairness for every generation.
Canadians did not vote on these repeated global power grabs, and Trudeau's actions are increasingly disconnected from the values and the wants of everyday Canadians. If you think Trudeau needs to resign, then sign our petition at trudeauMustResign.com and support our work there so you can keep hearing from independent media just like Rebel News. That's trudeauMustResign.com.